Welcome to the Mike Litton Experience Podcast. Mike has over 31 years experience in real estate, finance, and investing. He's passionate about being a father, a teacher, a realtor, an investor, and a leader. Everyone has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. And now, introducing the host of the Mike Litton Experience, Mike Litton.
So what can you expect from the Mike Litton Experience? You can expect stories that will inspire, motivate, advice that will sharpen your focus, and expert information on real estate, finance, and market conditions. Lane Kawaoka, thank you so much for being our guest on the Mike Litton Experience. I'm super excited about our time together. And like we talked about before we hit record, everybody has a story. And our passion is to help them tell it. So with your permission, we're going to start with where you were born, go all the way up to today. And we want to talk about all the amazing things you're doing. You're an amazing role model. And you're also somebody that shares a lot about how you got to where you are. So we want to talk about that when we get to that point. Is that okay?
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Mike.
Appreciate you being here, buddy. All the way from Honolulu, Hawaii. This is cool.
Yeah. Aloha, everybody.
Yeah.
Took a long time to get here, but
that's awesome,
amazing thing to do.
So where were you born?
So I was born in California.
Okay.
We moved. I think we moved to Hawaii where my parents grew up when I was like 3 or 4. So I essentially grew up here in Hawaii. So I consider this kind of my hometown.
Gotcha.
Parents were, I call it the shrinking middle class, right? I mean, they had a master's degree, doctorate degree, certainly, paid a lot in taxes, high producers of society. I'm fourth generation Japanese. So, I mean, we look Japanese, but I mean, we're pretty Americanized at this point. And, I think normally, second, third, fourth generation, which is my parents and myself, we're taught to kind of go to school, study hard, still be very frugal with our money, growing up whenever we went to restaurants, I mean, which is pretty rare, which is actually why I like going to restaurants today, because it was kind of a treat back then.
Yeah.
We would never order like soft drinks, you get water, it's free. And, I call this the linear path. For a lot of my clients, like, we're taught to go to school, study hard, get a good job. I eventually became an engineer. I don't know why, maybe because I was good at math and science. I know one day when I was in high school, I was just Googling. I mean, that was when Google was super new. I was like, well, what are the top, what's the quickest way I can get out of college with the least amount of college and get paid the highest? And I think a lot of people know out there, it's all the engineering degrees, right? Mechanical, electrical, computer science, civil. So that's what I did, right? I went to University of Washington up in Seattle. Eventually lived in Seattle for 12 years. And I just started to, I got my degree and started to work for the man as a construction supervisor, working for BNSF Railway, which is Fortune 50 company before it was bought out by Warren Buffett. And I hated it, man. I mean, it was rough, traveling all over for work. It's a private company, so very, very high stress. Transportation companies, for people who don't know, it's very tough on people's quality of life and families. But it was all right for me back then. I was in my early 20s. I traveled all over for work. I got out of college around 2007, right before the great financial crisis. So I kind of lucked out by having a good job. I was able to keep it through the Great Recession. And it was, paid me well, where I could save, $30,000-$40,000 per year from my paycheck. And a couple of years later, so I graduated in 2007. In 2009, I had enough money to save up to buy a $350,000 primary residence in Seattle, which I thought was really cool. And this is like in my early 20s.
Yeah.
And again, I'm on this like escalator of wealth, right? Like everything I'm supposed to do, buy a house and live in, blindly follow everything and invest in the 401k, max that stuff out, Roth IRAs. I did it. And there was at that point, this is well before Turo and renting out your house. I was only home during the weekends, like on Saturday, because I would travel out for work on the job sites. And I had this big house to myself. So I just started to rent it out, and I lived nowhere for several years. And during those years, I was able to save like $100,000 every single year, which I used to just go buy more rental properties.
That's
So
cool, man.
I was making money hand and fist about this time. And this is kind of my aha moment where I got off of this linear path. I was like, I'm making money four ways here. Cash flow, the tenant is paying down my mortgage, which is the big difference with rental properties and buying your own property for your primary residence. The tax benefits, and I mean the paid up, getting the appreciation on the property. And I was like, why the heck would I want to put my money in the 401k stuff at like 8 to 10% that goes up and down like a roller coaster, when I can invest in this simple rental property, buy and hold rental property back then. And that was kind of when I realized that the whole 401k, Wall Street, traditional investment stuff just was a bit of a sham. And that was kind of when I started to really educate about this stuff.
So a lot of people, when they're doing what you were doing and they're working, like you said, for the man, right? They're getting a paycheck every couple of weeks, and the paycheck that they're getting has withholding in it, right? And those taxes are withheld, and those are kept. Pardon me. And then at the end of the year, you're basically settling up, right? When you file your taxes. Okay, you paid this much in FICA, you paid this much in SDI, et cetera, et cetera. What's interesting about when people realize, when they get to the place where you got to, and they realize, I'm paying. So to give you an example, in California, we have state income tax, and with the state income tax included, it can be 30, 35, 40% of your income. Okay. And what people don't realize until they get to where you got to, sort of that aha moment, right? It's like an epiphany where they realize there really is an opportunity here to get to a place eventually, if you invest correctly in real estate, to where you're not paying taxes anymore. Your income is tax-free. It's an instant 30, 35, 40% raise.
Yeah, I mean, I'll expand that a little bit more too. I mean, that first property I bought was $350,000. In Seattle, Washington, the land values are pretty expensive, so the building improvement is the portion that you can depreciate.
Right.
So, just for simple math for folks doing it at home, approximately $200,000 of that was the building improvement.
Right.
Which on little rental properties, you can depreciate over 27 and a half years. So you take that 200,000 divided by 27 and a half, and that's what you can pretty much deduct off of your passive income every single year, which I think came out to like $6,000 or so every year, which was more than enough to offset how much income I made from the cash flow. I charged the tenant $2,100 a month. Of course, I had a lot of expenses, insurance, repairs. I paid a professional property manager to do my dirty work for me, so because I was out working my W-2 job. And what a lot of people don't realize, I mean, we just mentioned, it offsets the income from that investment. But there'll be typically a surplus of these passive activity losses. We call these PALs for short. And when you're making under $100,000 AGI, you can use up to $25,000 of that to just knock it out. Of course, later on we'll talk about syndications and private placements and cost segregations and more aggressive depreciation. But this is like, I didn't know any of this type of stuff. My parents never owned rental properties. Like when we were growing up, I do remember when I was like 9, I was like, I kind of got this sense of like, not everybody owns their house, and like some people rent. I'm like, dude, like I told my mom, dude, like, we should rent our house. And then of course they're like, no, we don't want to do that because they'll screw up our house. And then that was the end of that dream. Right. But like that was all I knew, right? I didn't have any accredited investor uncles or people who were $1 million net worth or greater. I'll get to kind of this at the later on in the story, but I mean, at this point, I was like, whoa, like I instantly saw like the light at the end of the tunnel of this crummy job I didn't work, and I'm like, well, it's not going to be a get rich quick scheme here, but like if I can just like save up another 30 grand to go buy another rental property and rinse, wash, repeat. And then as things went along, it expedited because I'm with every rental property, I was able to, put another 3-4 grand every year to buy these rental properties. So that's what I did. I, a couple years later, I bought a duplex in Seattle, Washington. And this is kind of where I learned, you don't, as a rental property owner, you try not to buy like nice properties in super nice areas or class A properties in class A neighborhoods.
Right.
There's a little bit of a sweet spot. You certainly don't want to be a slumlord in like class C or F war zone areas. But, my first rental property was an A class rental. I didn't get the best rent to value ratio. So I think just for a real quick for everybody, rent to value ratio is this quick and dirty way of analyzing a property. So you take the monthly rental price divided by the purchase price, and you're looking for something about 1% or higher. The higher, the better.
Yeah.
That first rental property I had, mind you, this is way back when prices were way, way better, was, well under 1%.
Yeah.
And part of that, the next property I bought was a duplex in a little bit rougher area. I would say more of a B- type of asset. Still didn't hit that 1% rent to value ratio. And this was 2012, where prices were really starting to jump up again and recover.
Right.
Which right now we're actually in that kind of timeline, right? Commercial real estate bombed 30% two years ago. And now this is kind of seen as the bottom. That, I mean, I'm kind of reliving my 2010 again, but I realized like, these numbers aren't working anymore. So I started to invest out of state, totally remote. So I started to buy rental properties in Birmingham, Atlanta, and Indianapolis. For some people, they've heard of this as like turnkey rentals, where outfits out there will buy up beat up properties, rehab them, put new flooring, appliances, new piping, they'll fix it up brand new for a renter. And sometimes they'll even put a tenant in there for you as, the investor. And that's what I did. I, did that for the next several years. In 2015, I had 11 of these rental properties, all while I was working my engineering job. And, this is all like, eventually, like, I think when I had like maybe 8 or 9 rentals, I switched jobs. Partially because I kind of like, I think part of it, I became like a really lazy worker because I was kind of like, this sucks, right? Like, why would I want to work?
Well, you're always getting called, right? So one of the things of working with a transportation company, and specifically with BNSF, and I actually have friends of friends that work at BNSF.
Yeah,
right?
BNSF stands for Better Not Start a Family.
Yeah, they are getting calls at 3 a.m, and they're having to get on a plane and fly to where, right? You never know where, and they're gone for 4 or 5 days at a time, because every time you turn around, there's some sort of an accident or some sort of a malfunction or some sort of something happening. And if you're the person that's on call, you're moving, right? There's not a lot of negotiation, or you know what I mean? Yeah, you have time off, but when you're on, you're on. And it's like people have a hard time figuring out sort of where terra firma is, because they're moving all the time. And so eventually that's got to get a little old.
Yeah, I mean, I'll share this story. I mean, what you said is exactly true. And it's not just singling out that particular company, but I would say if most or a lot of private companies are like that, that aren't in kind of the tech space, which is a little, I think, a lot easier quality of life for those guys. But anyway, I picked the civil engineering, industrial engineering degree. So, hey, that's the grave I dug.
Yeah.
But maybe it was a kind of a good thing because it pushed me out of that world.
It turned out it was perfect,
Yeah. But I had my first several years, I was a construction supervisor, and I, managed these crews out in the wild blue yonder. And I had an employee, he was kind of my age at the time. And in a way, we kind of, grew those first years in our career together. And I think like maybe 8 years later, I heard the guy like died in an accident,
Mm.
which people die kind of a lot on the railroad. I mean,
Yeah.
especially when you have like 50,000 employees, you're going to have a couple of fatalities every year. And,
Yeah.
part of, the supervisor's job is to take accountability for when things like that happen. And we take great care on that type of stuff to try and prevent it, but it happens.
Mhm.
And so like a company-wide email came out, and then, I was, I knew the dude, right? I
Mhm.
mean, he had a young family, and like it was kind of just business as usual out there at my job. Nobody really cared. And I just kind of realized that, man, nobody gives a rip what you do out there. They say all this like,
Mhm.
oh, we're all family, like watch out for your brother's keeper. But like at the end of the day, the dude's dead, and the wife has to watch the other two. I think he had 3 kids, maybe.
Mhm.
But I think I just thought to myself, yeah, like this, like we're all just renting this space here. We're just
Yep.
trading our time for money. And I eventually, I mean, like I said, I got to a point where my rental properties was, you know, almost half of my paycheck, right? So I started to look elsewhere, um, and for another job. So I started to work for the city government. So I
Mhm.
switched from private to government, and
Mhm.
it was like night and day. It's like fine, like I saw colors for the first time. Like people were like having a good time. There was not this cutthroat attitude amongst employees, and it was just like, man, why didn't I make the switch a long time ago? But I mean, I, that's what passive real estate does, right? Or investing does. It allows you opportunities. And I hadn't yet quit a job. I mean, I was still working a job, but I didn't need to get that extra little pay. And I certainly didn't need to climb the corporate ladder,
Yeah.
right? Like, why would I want to work 50% harder for 10% more pay? I mean, I get it, a
Exactly.
lot of people do it. I mean, that's what you need to do to
Mhm.
distance yourself, unless you do something as time tested as buying rental properties and prudently saving and rinse, washing, repeat, doing it again and again and
Mhm.
again, like how I did. But it takes time. But that was kind of what was going on in my corporate life. On my investing side, with 11 rentals, I ran into some more problems. For people who never owned that many rentals, it kind of sucks because
Mhm.
yes, you have a property manager to deal with all your headaches and do all the repairs, lease up with all the tenants, deal with all their complaints and headaches. But with a few thousand, a few $100s a month of passive cash flow per unit, that's just not enough.
Mhm.
11 times, a few grand, that's 30, 40 grand per year. That's just not enough to live off of.
Right.
And with 11 rental properties, the exception rate is usually about 1 to 2 evictions a year.
Mm.
And, 1/3 of those evictions will typically end up in a big catastrophe, like a $20,000 repair.
Mm.
There's a video on my YouTube channel where like they just trashed the property, and we walked through in a camera. I think this was back in like 2014 or 15.
Mm.
And you just lose all faith in humanity, right? Not only you just pissed off because I'm like, I just lost all the cash flow and profit for 3 of my properties for the entire year right there.
Yeah.
And then not to mention, you have small things that happen, like a tree fall in the house, flood out in the basement. Like these things happen. And with 11 properties, they happen like pretty much every quarter.
Mhm.
And that's just not enough. With 11 rental properties, that's just not enough. You need 3 or 4 times that.
Yeah.
Most of my clients, they need $10,000 to $20,000 of passive cash flow every single month.
Right.
And this is where I realized like, this rental property thing isn't quite scalable.
Right.
And this is when I started to search for other, investors. There has to be more people like me, right? That
Mhm.
own multiple rental properties that take, I think the number one mistake of investors and landlords who only have 1 or 2 rental properties is they pay them down, right? You want to pay them down to a certain point, but unfortunately at a certain point your return on equity goes way down. So when you're not making 14, 60% on your rental properties because your leverage isn't as strong because you've been paying down your mortgage,
Right.
you need to take that and either do a 1031 exchange, a cash out refinance, or a HELOC and get the money into another asset. And then at some point, and in my wealth elevator book, I talk about this concept of getting to critical mass.
Mhm.
$4 to $5 million net worth is what most of our clients kind of shoot for.
Mhm.
That's when you, if you want to, you can start paying off the mortgages and the debt at that point. But up until that ascent, you're in growth mode.
Mhm.
And I started to search for people who are in this circumstance. And a lot of these people are accredited investors. So accredited investors are people who make over $200,000 a year at their day job or their business, or they have a net worth of $1 million or greater. And as I mentioned earlier, like I didn't know anybody with this type of category. I didn't have any rich uncle. But I just started to, vicariously kind of meet these people. A lot of these people were older than myself, right? In their late 40s, early 50s.
Yeah.
But I saw the light, right? All these guys had done what I did and were selling off their little rental properties, trading it for in larger investments in apartments and syndication deals, being a passive investor so the debt doesn't get put in their personal name.
Right.
They were also not the general partner and managing member, so they could now diversify over dozens and dozens of these great alternative investments. And the tax benefits were stronger because you're able to do a cost segregation and get a lot of bonus depreciation. And it allowed, these people to, continue working their job or not. And it gave people a lot of options. And so this is kind of a big inflection point in my investing journey around 2015, 2016. I started to trade out my little rental properties for these bigger deals. And, that was kind of where I started to, had some failures in terms of invested with like the wrong people. Cause now you're investing with, individual sponsors, general partners. And I didn't know who to trust. So I just, you just talk to people, you meet other people, you network. And, when you don't know anybody and you don't know very much and you don't know how to underwrite deals, you tend to make some mistakes. So I would say the first 15 deals I went into, maybe a few of them were just with shysters or just people who were faking it till they make it.
Mhm.
And this is kind of where I was like, well, I'm kind of young. I got some time. I'm just going to run the deal myself. So that's kind of where I started to kind of just do these deals. We'd buy little lower end class C properties that were like 50, 60 units. They're difficult for sure. I mean, a lot of people in those like properties, maybe 80% of the people pay on time,
Yeah.
or at all. But we, in these type of deals, you have a value add strategy, such as, you're going to change out the flooring, appliances, maybe put 5-10 grand of rehab into every single unit, put some playground equipment outside, change out the management staff. You're trying to bump the rents up couple $100 across the board. And, in with that, it's for people who understand, like there's this burst strategy out there where you buy, rent it out, and then while you're renting it out, you rehab it and refinance. Essentially the same thing, but times 100 or 200. And you're in commercial assets and you're having existing cash flow from the other units at the same time. And then slowly 3 to 5 years later, you flip the property and you go into the next one. That was essentially the model that we did. And, we just kind of scaled up from there, eventually bought a little bit nicer properties, class B properties. And then in 2020, at that point, we crossed over the $1 billion mark. I mean, I quit my job 2018 to do this full time. And then we started to hire out people who were much better than I was at doing this stuff.
Mhm.
And then started to build the company. And then, at that point, I realized that, still a lot of people, there's a lot of these like guru training camps out there that teach people how to buy apartments and do all kinds of things.
Mhm.
And, the barrier to entry was relatively low. So to kind of separate ourselves, and swimming upstream, we started to develop assets from the ground up, right? And it
Right.
kind of brought in my engineering background and, just from getting a loan from a bank, right? You need to be qualified to get a bank loan on a 200, 300 unit apartment complex value add. but you just need an extra level of designation and experience level to do a development. So
Yeah, if you're going to run the construction, right? Yeah.
yeah. So that was just a way of kind of separating us from the crowd a little bit more. But just at the end of the day, like we try to invest in things that cater towards the lower middle class. I mean, there's obviously a good feeling about that because it's kind of an underserved part of the population. But I try to look at things from a trends perspective. What's going to be around for the next 10 years? It's no secret that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. And in there, of course, we try to help out a lot of the shrinking middle class, people like myself who pay a lot in taxes. They need to invest in these alternative investments to stay where they're at and ascend. But, like with the population in America growing and, like we just see the huge need in this kind of, apartment complex, people paying $900 to $1,200 a month rent in, more of like the secondary and tertiary markets out there. So, people think that investing is like, well, what's the best thing at the moment? I mean, that's, I guess we do that too. We also do some venture capital investments. We've branched off a little bit, but the bread and butter, and I think the foundation of people's portfolio are like these basic necessities that are going to be around long time from now. I would say, think of it no different than, I don't know if this is the same today because I don't invest in stocks, bonds, mutual funds personally, but it's like 10, 20 years ago, people, this is what Microsoft was like. It's a blue chip stock. It's not going to go anywhere. Right. So you can have some, we talked about earlier about having stability and some kind of foundation. In a way, that's the way I look at investing in apartment complexes or these types of assets that, produce cash flow. You can value add it, but that there's not going to be any disruption.
Yeah.
That's just going to take the need away from this type of investment.
So there's less in the way of disruption simply because of the numbers, right? But like you were talking about earlier, you had 11 units, something like that, and every quarter something crazy happened, something disastrous took place, right? Where you'd have to come in and you'd have to come in and repair a unit, and you'd have to turn around and re-rent it out and all that kind of thing. And so what people don't understand is there's a law of numbers, right? So let's go back real quick to the BRRRR strategy. One of the things that's fairly popular is you buy a property, you remodel it, repair it, right? Get it basically ready for prime time. You rent it out for more money, and then you turn around and refinance it. You take your original capital, if you can, out of it, and then you go out and do it again. It's a rinse and repeat kind of thing, right? And so that's the BRRRR thing. So is it okay if I ask you just a couple of real quick questions?
Yeah.
Growing up in Hawaii, what was your favorite thing about growing up there?
I don't know, the weather. The weather was nice. I mean, that's eventually why I tried to get back here. I mean, I was in Seattle for the longest time. Why? Because there's not many good jobs here in Hawaii, and it's expensive. But hey, that's what passive cash flow does. Allows you to live where you want, best where the numbers make sense remotely.
So when you made the decision, so when you went to high school, did you have a favorite subject?
Not really, man. I mean, look, I'm one of these guys who just like whatever is the quickest path to get to where I want efficiently, and that's what I do. I mean, I even when I was in high school, I knew I didn't want to do basket weaving or East Asian historical studies. Like I knew that wasn't going to get me anywhere.
Right. Why'd you pick the University of Washington?
Do what everybody else tells me and and apply to 6 or 7 places and go to the best one.
Gotcha. Okay. So when you went to work for BNSF, what made you do that?
I'll be honest, like I did an internship with them.
We hope you enjoyed another episode of the Mike Litton Experience. If you did, do us a favor, smash that subscribe button, tell your friends, family, and coworkers about our program, and wherever you get your podcasts, please leave us a rating. It helps us to connect with quality people just like you.
And that's a wrap. Another episode of the Mike Litton Experience in the books. reach out to Mike on Instagram at Litton Realty. Want to meet with Mike? Check out calendly.com/Rio760.